Well, Bizarro has indeed arrived. As seen in the previous season's finale, Clark's equal and opposite doppelganger is not only just as powerful as Clark, he also gets stronger from kryptonite and he can actually fly. While this does result in Clark getting tossed around quite a bit, he still manages to put up a decent fight and ends up flinging and impaling Bizarro onto some power lines. This doesn't exactly kill this imposter though, as he still manages to wriggle his way free and go looking for more kryptonite to power himself up. Before Clark can do much more about him though, he has to return to the dam, which, as a result of their battle, has completely broken and is bursting. As a matter of fact, the resulting flood of water even ends up swallowing up the police car Lex was placed in, as he ends up trapped at the bottom of the river. Just as he's running out of air and is about to drown though, he sees a rather unusual sight. As if you really needed to ask, yes, this mysterious angelic savior is indeed none other than Clark's cousin Kara, aka Supergirl. While she is a more than welcomed addition in my opinion, she doesn't exactly get to shine this season, as she's pretty much just introduced and then mostly sidelined. They really don't do much of value with her at all. She doesn't really get a proper introduction until a bit later either, as Clark still has a few people to save and a foe to vanquish. While he does manage to find and help Lois and Chloe get to safety, it might be too little too late for Chloe, as she's still unconscious. In fact, she's actually even worse off than that, as even the hospital can't seem to save her this time.
Come on, Chloe, stay with me. Clear. Time of death, 13:49.
That's right, Chloe actually dies. Until she wakes up in the morgue. Yep, it seems even death can't stop this girl, and she can literally just use video game logic, sleep it off, and she'll be fine. Guess this is one character we won't be getting rid of anytime soon then. I suppose this development could at least make for some interesting storylines at some point though, but as for this season, it's barely even brought up. Yes, there is one episode where more or less the same thing happens again, but aside from that, Chloe only ever uses her powers to heal a paper cut. I'm dead serious. No pun intended. At any rate, there is one more person in need of rescuing, namely Lionel. Unfortunately, the only trace of him Clark can find is one of his shoes, as he's apparently been washed away by the bursting dam, somehow ending up on a nearby riverbank. While he may not get rescued by Clark though, it seems he's not the only one keeping an eye out. Exactly who is this mysterious Samaritan though, and what do they want with Lionel? Well, we don't really find out for a while, but as it happens, it's none other than Lana. That is to say, she is the one responsible for his rescue and subsequent imprisonment. It was probably one of her hired goons that actually dragged him away from the river. Yep, Lana is unsurprisingly still alive, and she does indeed have hired goons now. She actually becomes kind of a semi-villain, anti-hero type of character this season, and yet she still feels rather redundant and just, well, wasted. There's really no reason to bring her back. Okay, so she does end up back together with Clark, and now that she knows his secret, there's seemingly no reason they can't be together, but of course things are never quite that simple, are they? Like I said, Lana comes back with something of a vendetta this time, as she's basically hell-bent on taking down Lex at absolutely any cost. While this is at the very least somewhat understandable given their history and whatnot, she still ends up going pretty dang far while actually wanting and planning to go even further. Not to mention that she also lies and hides her true agenda from Clark. In other words, Lana is just being a vindictive, manipulative hypocrite, and she has more than overstayed her welcome at this point. She does not need to be here anymore. What exactly does she do this season though, and how does kidnapping Lionel fit into it? Well, I think we'll hold off a bit on the bigger Lex-based aspects of it all, but as far as the whole Lionel thing goes, I'm honestly not quite sure. I think Lana says something about it being a way to keep him away from Clark or some such, but how exactly does this help Clark? Yeah, I'm sure this wannabe misery setup will aid Clark immensely. It's the obvious solution to all of his problems. Either way, Lionel does eventually manage to get free, so I suppose everyone is at least alive and accounted for. As such, Clark turns his attention back to finding and defeating Bizarro, but considering he has seemingly no weaknesses, he decides to get a bit of help from everyone's favourite Martian. Somehow. Yeah, I suppose it doesn't really matter, but I have no idea how Clark managed to contact this guy and get him to return. After all, he was last seen leaving Earth in order to heal, so for all we and Clark knows, he could be pretty much anywhere in the universe by now. As soon as Clark even thinks about him though, and I mean in the very next scene, John is just there. No explanation of any kind, he just appears out of nowhere as if Clark just willed him back to Earth. Again, not that important, I know, but it still really bugs me. In any case, John explains that Bizarro is more than likely looking for more kryptonite to power himself up, and if he succeeds, it could pose a serious issue. Luckily, there is a way Clark can power up and weaken Bizarro at the same time, and even more luckily, it's through a fairly abundant and easily available resource.
Your faith in humans is not the only thing that gives you strength.
The yellow sun.
Hang on, is this supposed to be news to Clark? Doesn't he already know this all too well? What about that episode where his powers went haywire due to solar flares? Did he just think that was a big coincidence? Maybe it's supposed to be more that he just needed a reminder or something, but it's definitely presented like it's a big revelation. It's like they forgot they already explained this multiple times. Either way, Clark does eventually find Bizarro, just as he finishes juicing on some crypto. While this does give him the upper hand at first, Clark quickly turns the table once he gets a hit of Sunny D, as he launches Bizarro into the stratosphere, where John takes over by apparently locking him away in some intergalactic prison somewhere. It's apparently not a very effective prison though, as Bizarro does eventually return for one more encounter, but we'll get to that in a bit. For now, Clark and his friends are left to finish grieving what they think is the loss of Lana, while Lex decides to turn himself in as he believes he was rescued by an angel in order to repent. At least, that's what he initially claims. Yeah, it turns out that Lex actually has a bit of an ulterior motive for letting himself get arrested. I know, I'm flabbergasted as well. As it happens though, it seems he's only using his incarceration as a way to track down Lana. After all, Lex knows he didn't kill her, and he's fairly certain no one else did either. Even when a supposedly disgruntled former employee of his actually confesses to the crime, Lex still refuses to believe it.
He didn't do it.
Lex? They found his fingerprints at the scene. He confessed to the crime.
I don't care what kind of evidence there is. The man did not murder my wife.
Lex obviously turns out to be right though, as he eventually tracks down and finds Lana somewhere in Shanghai. She apparently prepared for this too though, as she not only aims a gun at Lex, but she's fully intending to kill him, as she can't possibly be prosecuted. After all, she's been officially declared dead, as her body was positively ID'd after that fake car explosion, and dead women can't commit murder, can they? Just how could she have been ID'd though? She's clearly still alive, so how exactly did she pull that off?
You cloned me.
Not exactly. Model 503 was never alive. That's why you were able to wheel it out of my lab and place it in the driver's seat. By the time the car exploded, you were safe and sound while Model 503 with your DNA was being blown to bits. It was perfect.
Perfect?
As far as the world's
Perfect? This is a joke, right? This can't seriously be the actual explanation you're actually gonna go with, can it? You're really just gonna throw in this whole clone nonsense and walk away calling this stupidity perfect? This is honestly dumber than just making the whole thing a damn dream. Firstly, Lex's reasons for cloning Lana? Non-existent and never brought up again. He just did it because, I guess. Secondly, Lana discovered this how and when exactly? And how in the name of sagging bollocks did she manage to not only gain access to said clone, but also sneak her out of a presumably heavily guarded and ultra-secure facility without anyone even batting an eye ever? This has got to be one of the worst, most convoluted and overcomplicated over-explanations I have ever seen. It's just so stupid. Ultimately, Lana doesn't actually kill Lex anyway, as she instead returns to Smallville to live relatively and seemingly happily with Clark. As it happens though, Clark is actually preparing to leave Smallville, as he's decided to finally accept and fully take on Jor-El's training at the Fortress. Before he gets very far though, he and Lois come across Kara's spaceship in the woods, as the two are finally introduced. Well, after a bit of back and forth, as Kara doesn't immediately believe Clark to be a friend, let alone Kal-El. After all, Kal-El is supposed to be a young boy according to Kara.
Your ship. It seemed to be underwater for a long time. You must have crash landed during the meteor shower, into the reservoir. When the dam broke, it finally brought you to the surface.
How long was I in suspended animation?
18 years.
This little snag obviously has Kara a bit rattled for a few moments, but it ultimately has little to no bearing on, well, anything. As previously mentioned, Kara's arrival actually doesn't amount to much for this entire season. Sure, she's around and all, but she doesn't really get that much screen time, and what time she does get is mostly spent with her just kind of existing. Well, she and Clark does have to track down her ship, as it apparently gets snapped up by a rather shady government agency called the Department of Domestic Security, or DDS for short. Bad enough in and of itself, but the big problem is that the ship has a pretty severe self-destruct sequence that will kick in if anyone other than Kara tries to get it open.
Define self-destruct.
I think you'd call it something like a nuclear explosion.
Yup, pretty bad to say the least, but luckily they do manage to prevent disaster as Kara reaches and somehow absorbs the ship's blast just as it goes boom and disappears for good. Exactly how did they find her ship when it was kept in such a highly secure and secret government facility though? Well, as it happens, Clark simply teaches Kara how to use her super hearing to find the ship's distress signal. Yup, Clark actually teaches Kara about her powers. The girl who has already mastered how to fly is the one who needs lessons about her powers, not the guy still stuck on the ground. Seriously, this whole no flights, no tights thing is really starting to show its flaws, and it's only going to get worse. Much, much worse. Either way, after stopping her ship from causing mayhem, Kara really is all but pointless for the rest of the season. They even send her away and give her amnesia for a while, essentially placing her in a holding pattern until they need her to rescue Clark. As for how she loses her memory in the first place, let's just say Kryptonians have a weird problem actually staying dead. In essence, Kara's father, Zor-El, entrusted her with this crystal that just happens to contain the genetic material of Lara, Clark's biological mother. Not being able to resist seeing her again, Clark decides to use said crystal at the fortress, which does indeed bring Lara back, but it also brings back Zor-El. Guess who turns out to have less than noble intentions? That's right, despite Kara remembering him as a good and honorable man, it turns out that Zor-El always hated Jor-El and wanted his wife for himself. Now that they've both been regenerated on Earth, Zor-El plans to make Lara his wife and the Earth his to rule. To that end, he actually made sure Lara came back with a certain innocuous-looking blue ring, as he knew she'd give it to Clark. Why is this important? Because it allows Zor-El to do this.
My abilities. What are you doing to me?
Father's ring might symbolize victory back home, but here it means defeat.
My mother gave me this ring.
You had no way of knowing the blue mineral robs your powers.
Yup, that blue stuff is yet another form of kryptonite that takes away Clark's powers. Which ultimately doesn't matter even slightly, as he just ends up using green kryptonite to incapacitate Zor-El, before getting rid of him completely by smashing that genetic crystal of his to bits. This does unfortunately cause Lara to disappear as well, and yes, it also causes Kara to get transported to Detroit, where she wakes up with complete amnesia. Why exactly does this happen, and why Detroit of all places? Are you really expecting an answer to that? Kara is eventually found though, but by Lex, not Clark. While he does manage to manipulate Kara into thinking he has nothing but noble intentions, Lex doesn't actually get all the answers he wants before Clark finally tracks her down and gets her back to the farm. It doesn't take too long before Kara actually returns to Lex though. She's even about to let Lex experiment on her under the guise of helping her recover her memory, as Clark, for some bewildering reason, has decided not to tell her the truth. I honestly just don't get what Clark's plan was here. Why does he think lying straight to Kara's face about who and what she is would be at all beneficial to anyone? You are literally pushing her straight back into Lex's radar when you could have just told her the truth and she'd never even let him get close. How the hell is this a better option? It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. As mentioned, Kara does eventually get her memory back though, as Chloe and Lana decide to bring her to the fortress and have her restored after Clark gets captured by some unknown military types armed with kryptonite weapons. That's right, they only bother bringing Kara back once Clark is in trouble. Isn't that nice? So who exactly are these goons that captured Clark though, and what exactly do they want with him? Well, as it turns out, they're apparently working for Lionel, and he wants Clark imprisoned because he wants to keep him safe? Sure, that makes sense. Let me at least try to explain what's going on, but trust me, it's not going to make much sense no matter what. The thing is that Lionel does indeed escape from his initial imprisonment by Lana relatively quickly, and weirdly enough, everyone just seems to forget all about it after that. Really, it's barely even brought up again, as everyone just goes back to their regularly scheduled programming as if nothing ever happened. That's actually a bit of a thing with this entire season. Not to veer off on too much of a tangent, but there really are quite a few developments and storylines here that are just dropped almost as soon as they're brought up. Even the ones they end up sticking with for a bit longer don't really go anywhere in the end, so yeah, the whole season just seems to be stagnating. It's like they just couldn't figure out how to move things forward. Perfect example, this whole Lionel imprisoning Clark thing. You see, this season also introduces the so-called Veritas Club, and oh boy is this a doozy. Apparently, Lionel has actually been far more aware of Clark and his origins for far longer than you might think, and it seems he's not the only one. It turns out that after Dr. Swan, you know, the scientist guy who helped Clark way back in season 2, discovered that message from Jor-El, he didn't actually keep it as secret as he made it seem. In fact, he apparently formed a secret society with the Queens, Oliver/Green Arrow's parents, the Teagues, the people Lana was involved with in season 4, and of course, Lionel. The purpose of this society was supposedly to serve as sort of a welcome wagon or guardian group for what they referred to as the Traveler, and they called this group Veritas. Shockingly enough though, Lionel didn't find this arrangement very satisfying, as he didn't just want to protect the Traveler, he wanted to use him for his own nefarious purposes, and wouldn't you know it, Dr. Swan apparently knew some secret way to make that possible.
The Traveler's coming now. We can't wait. That envelope and the secret inside it will give us ultimate power. There isn't one among us who could resist that temptation.
We agreed we would not open that envelope unless the Traveler proved to be a threat. That's why Swan and I are flying to Zurich, to make sure that the secret is kept locked safely away, and ultimate power is left in the hands of the gods.
Robert.
As you might expect, Lionel isn't about to give up quite that easily though, as he eventually has the Queens and Daddy Teague killed. I believe they also insinuate that he may have had some hand in Dr. Swan's demise as well, but I might just be extrapolating a bit there. Point is, Lionel was hell-bent on gaining access to whatever was in that envelope, so he had his supposed allies killed to gain sole possession of the Zurich safe deposit box they stashed it in. Unfortunately, said box also requires 2 keys to open, and even with the demise of his compatriots, Lionel still only managed to find one. The other one was in fact left in the care of Dr. Swan's daughter, Patricia. That's right, Dr. Swan apparently had a daughter we didn't know about, and she is pretty much the catalyst to why Lionel decides to capture Clark. You see, Patricia has been trying to contact Lionel via the use of these Veritas stamped letters, and instead of reading them or figuring out who sent them or anything sensible, Lionel decides to interpret them as a threat. It couldn't possibly be that Patricia just wants to meet Clark and continue the supportive and helpful relationship her father had with him. No, we simply must assume the worst and take the most unnecessary and drastic steps imaginable. Seriously, why wouldn't Lionel at least talk to Clark before going this far? Hell, even if his fears are justified, which to be fair they do kinda turn out to be, why not just go warn Clark instead of hiring a bunch of heavily armed goons to take him against his will and put him in a cage? Even worse, why entrust his care to some psycho who just wants to torture Clark because he thinks he's one of them there meteor freaks? Absolutely none of this makes any sense whatsoever. It's just plain nuts. Clark is eventually released with the help of Kara though, after which he does actually meet with Patricia, who does indeed just offer her support as well as her father's last journal. She also warns Clark that Lionel is not to be trusted no matter how much he claims to have changed, something which does lead Clark to confront Lionel and finally cut ties with him for good. This severance ultimately becomes more permanent than Clark might have first thought though, as it seems Lionel wasn't really the Luthor he should have been worrying about. In brief-ish, Lex has actually been busy going full-on villain. As mentioned, he tracks down Kara when she's missing in order to manipulate her into his experiments, he buys the Daily Planet to prevent Jimmy, Chloe and Lois from digging into his more illicit activities, and yes, he finds out about and begins digging into this whole Veritas thing. While he doesn't really learn exactly what they were up to or who this Traveler is or anything, Lex does find out about that secret envelope and even ends up killing Patricia for her key. Yup, she really lasted a whole couple of episodes. What an absolutely essential character. As mentioned though, her single key is not enough to gain access to that safe deposit box, so Lex starts looking everywhere for its companion, leading us to this inevitable exchange.
I've swept every possible place you could have hidden it. I finally realized there's only one person you would trust it with. Yourself. I was raised in your shadow. Now you're gonna die in mine.
Yup, Lex actually kills Lionel. Not only does this mark yet another lost father figure for Clark, it also pretty much completes Lex's villain arc as he finally and truly embraces his evil side completely. Well, actually, he does briefly seem slightly remorseful for taking Lionel's life, as he's subsequently haunted by visions of a young, innocent version of himself, berating him for killing their father. This boy even attempts to make Lex confess to Clark once he inevitably comes calling, but Lex obviously decides to take a slightly different approach, as he instead ends up killing off this better part of himself for good. No, really, he actually and literally grabs his younger self during one of his appearances and burns him to death in his fireplace. In other words, he purges the last remaining vestiges of goodness from his soul in order to finally become truly evil. Even though he may actually have been more ruthless and disturbing in previous seasons. Don't get me wrong, Lex isn't exactly a fountain of candy corn and marshmallows this season, but he's definitely not a complete devil either. Maybe it's just that a lot of his deeds are done off-screen and not necessarily showcased as much, but having him literally kill off his innocence like this is still a fairly heavy-handed way of explaining how Lex is totally evil now for reals, when he could just, actually be evil. Just take the whole Daily Planet situation as an example. I did briefly mention that Lex eventually buys and becomes editor of said paper himself, but he's actually somewhat in charge even before then. Thing is, this season also introduced us to Grant Gabriel, the new editor of the Daily Planet. While he initially seems like a fairly reasonable, if somewhat uncompromising young go-getter, he's also almost suspiciously averse to printing pretty much any story involving Lex, no matter how verifiable it may or may not be. He probably just expects the highest ethical standards from his reporters and just doesn't want to be accused of slander or some such though, right? I mean, it's not like he's actually working with Lex because he's secretly a clone of his long-lost brother Julian or something.
We can't keep this secret forever, Lex. I'm not afraid of Lionel Luthor.
Well, you should be. No one can know, do you understand? If he found out the truth, he could kill you.
I'm his son. You're my brother. How could he?
Really? We're bringing back Julian again? And this time he's secretly a clone to boot? This opens up so many questions, and absolutely not one of them ever gets any answers. It's ridiculous. Seriously, the initial reveal of Grant actually being Julian is questionable enough, but then they double down by also revealing later on that he's actually just the latest success in a long line of cloning experiments undertaken by Lex. Why would Lex do any of this? How? When? For what ultimate purpose? Never once mentioned. Really, they just introduce Grant, eventually reveal this whole cloning kerfuffle, kill him off, and then never talk about it ever again. It's completely and utterly pointless. The only reason Grant even exists in the first place is seemingly just so they have a way of officially making Lois a part of the Daily Planet staff. After all, he's the one who hires her, and as we all know, they couldn't possibly have made that happen in any other way. It had to be done by Lex's secret clone brother, obviously. Even that aspect doesn't really make sense though, as Lex makes it very clear that he views Lois as a potential threat due to her tenacity and inquisitive nature. He even goes so far as to order Julian to break things off with her once they become somewhat of a thing for a few episodes, and yet he still wants her on the Daily Planet staff? Sure, maybe that decision was made by Grant before Lex explained anything to him. He didn't even know he was a clone yet after all, but why wouldn't Lex even attempt to have her fired after that, or at least do so once he takes over the planet for himself? None of this makes any sense whatsoever. It's complete and utter crap. As is the return of Brainiac. Yeah, it seems the Brain interactive construct wasn't fully destroyed after all, as some small piece of him apparently survived and has been kept safe and secure in one of Lex's facilities. I'm not quite sure how or when Lex actually managed to find the surviving piece, but he has at least kept it safe and secure in some tube lined with kryptonite. Unfortunately, this tube is eventually broken during a certain scuffle between Clark and Lana that I just can't be bothered to get into, as the only important part of it really is that it allows Brainiac to escape and reform. As you might expect, this does indeed cause a few problems for Clark and Kara, but not for quite a while. Hell, he even kinda helps Clark for a while, as he's the one who teaches him how to get rid of Bizarro once and for all. Yes, Bizarro does indeed return after his initial banishment, as he apparently manages to escape whatever prison the Manhunter put him in. He also happens to return at the best possible time, as he does so just as Jor-El temporarily imprisons Clark in the fortress as punishment for the whole Zor-El situation. No, I don't really get the point of that one either. In any case, with Clark gone, Bizarro essentially just steps in and starts taking over his life, with everyone else completely unaware of his true identity. Least of all Lana, who actually starts trusting him even more than the real Clark. Yeah, not to go off on too many sub-tangents or anything, but this is as good a place as any to also go over Lana's true intentions. As mentioned, Lana returns with a bit of a vendetta against Lex, even going so far as to set up a new foundation that she claims is meant to aid and counsel those affected by kryptonite. This is obviously just an elaborate cover though, as she actually uses said foundation to monitor and spy on Lex. Dubious and questionable enough in and of itself, but wait until you hear what she actually named this new venture.
Can I help you? Yeah, I was hoping I could get it.
Chloe.
Lana.
What are you doing here?
I stumbled across the ISIS Foundation website and saw they were reaching out to meteor victims.
No, your eyes and ears didn't deceive you. She actually named the foundation ISIS. That's unfortunate. Or maybe somewhat prophetic? In all seriousness, there's nothing inherently sinister about naming this organization ISIS, as it's really only a reference to the Egyptian goddess of magic, motherhood, healing, and protection. This episode was also written and made well before the other ISIS was really a big thing, so while it is a bit of an interesting coincidence, that is pretty much all it really is. I mean, it's not like they make any other troubling connections between these two ISISes, right?
We have reason to believe that your girlfriend is working for a terrorist sleeper cell.
Okay, never mind then. Alright, fine, I'm obviously joking, but there is indeed an episode where the government accuses ISIS of being a front for domestic terrorism after Chloe uses it to hack some NSA satellites. No, this obviously wasn't an intentional connotation, but it's still a pretty unfortunate, awkward, and just overall uncomfortable coincidence to say the least. Just why was Chloe using the ISIS servers in the first place though, and why did she hack the NSA? Well, the answer to that does sort of bring it back to the Brainiac and Bizarro situation. As mentioned, Bizarro essentially starts taking over Clark's life when he returns, even fooling Lana into revealing the true purpose of ISIS as they start working together to take down Lex. At least that's what Bizarro makes Lana believe, when in reality he just wants to find a way to increase his power and stop his face from distorting whenever he's in direct sunlight. This eventually leads him and Lana to discover that Brainiac is still alive, as Bizarro tracks him down to get his help. While he doesn't have much to offer, Brainiac does lead Bizarro on a search for some beacon that will supposedly lead him to a Kryptonian scientist hiding somewhere on Earth. Said search eventually leads Bizarro to the Fortress, which causes Jor-El to release Clark from his imprisonment in order to stop Bizarro for good. After getting pretty much the same information from Lionel as Bizarro got from Brainiac, Clark actually finds that Kryptonian scientist, as he actually had that beacon of his in his possession already. This scientist, named Daxur, gives Clark the blue kryptonite he apparently needs to overload and destroy Bizarro once and for all, as that's exactly what he does. Well, technically Lana is the one who actually gets the kryptonite into Bizarro's hands, but yeah, he gone now. As I briefly alluded to earlier though, it wasn't actually Lionel that helped Clark find Daxur, it was Brainiac in disguise. Why would he want to help Clark defeat his doppelganger? Because he also needs Daxur to get himself back to his fully functional state. Well, technically he just needs the information in Daxur's mind, which he eventually gets by killing him using his usual finger thingy into Brainstick. As it turns out though, it seems Brainiac still needs a bit of assistance, this time from none other than Kara, which leads us to the true crap factor of this whole thing. You see, it turns out that Kara somehow has the power to let Brainiac travel back in time. Oh yes, they're actually going there. Brainiac's ultimate plan, his final attempt at getting rid of Clark once and for all, is to travel back to Krypton before it blew up, using Kara and her sudden and very convenient ability to open wormholes. I'm not even kidding, they never explain how any of this is even remotely possible. Kara can just time jump now. I think they hint at it maybe having something to do with her bracelet or some such, but it really doesn't add up either way. Nor does Brainiac's actual plan or its following aftermath. Essentially, he's planning to kill Clark as a baby, so the current Clark ceases to exist. He obviously fails to do so, as Clark also makes it back to Krypton in time to save both Kara and himself, both versions, but even if he hadn't, this plan probably wouldn't work. Not to get too theoretical, and I'm obviously no expert, but if Brainiac had succeeded, shouldn't Clark just disappear the instant Brainiac made it back to Krypton? Either that, or it wouldn't matter anyway, as him not vanishing kinda proves that time doesn't work that way, and that this all just creates a new timeline or some such, so in the end, it just seems like a really dumb and utterly pointless idea. It does end up causing a few issues though, but even they make little to no sense. As mentioned, Clark does indeed stop Brainiac, as both he and Kara return safe and sound, but Kara seems to have changed somewhat. She becomes hell-bent on tracking down that Veritas artifact that will supposedly control Clark, as she not only causes a plane carrying one of the former Veritas members to crash, she eventually even turns against Clark completely and seemingly starts siding with and helping Lex. As you may have guessed, something is obviously going on with Kara, and when Chloe attempts to stop her using some kryptonite, we finally find out what.
Why isn't it working? Check the expiration date. Kara, there's something seriously wrong with you. It was the only way.
You lied to me.
Clark's not here. Oh God.
I'm impressed.
Yep, she was actually Brainiac all along. I think. See, this is an okay twist, I suppose, but it's also kinda confusing. After all, it must mean that Kara never actually returned from the time jump to Krypton, as Brainiac somehow fended her off, and yet he still acted like Kara at first? Or is it more like time hadn't quite caught up yet or some such, and she was back, but then somehow morphed into Brainiac at some point, like during this scene? I mean, if that's not what's happening and this really is Brainiac all along, why is he going for some milk in the middle of the night? Hell, why is he just hanging out at the Kent farm in the first place? That's somehow part of his plan, is it? It all just raises so many unnecessary and potentially rather disturbing questions. Either way, Brainiac did indeed make it back from past Krypton after all, as he somehow managed to trap Kara in the Phantom Zone without Clark noticing. Even though he was only like 3 steps away from Kara when she supposedly took care of Brainiac, but sure. Clark does finally and rather easily manage to put Brainiac out of everyone's misery in the end though, as he simply gives him an overdose of electricity. Getting rid of Brainiac doesn't exactly solve everything though, but before we get to how this all ends, I do have a few more things I'd like to cover, starting with this season's cameos and new characters. Kara is obviously the big new character here, and I already mentioned Grant/Julian, but we do get one more addition by the name of Dinah Lance, aka Black Canary. Unfortunately, she only appears for 1 episode, and even there, she doesn't get all that much to do. I think she's a decent enough version of the character, and she does return in later seasons, but here, she's pretty much just like, yep, I exist, see you later. The only thing that might be worth noting, maybe, is this show's version of her trademark canary cry. Now, I don't really know what would be most comic accurate or what most of the fanbase thinks, but I do find it odd that in this show, or at least this season, this canary cry is actually more of a roar. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's not a scream or cry or song or whatever, it's a roar. I mean, she's supposed to be Black Canary, not Black Tiger. There's honestly not anything else to say about her for now, as she really is pretty pointless this season, but I suppose it could be worse. I mean, just look at the big cameo this season. Yeah, there may not be any other new characters, but there are 1 or 2 cameos. There's Dean Cain's appearance as an immortal and homicidal doctor named Curtis Cox, a kinda sorta adaptation of the character Vandal Savage, but other than the neatness of a former Superman playing a supervillain, there's not much to that one. The bigger, more noteworthy cameo comes in the form of none other than Clark's former best friend, Pete the Boss Ross. Yep, Pete actually returns for 1 single episode, and he even gains his own set of superpowers. This should be a pretty fun reunion and episode, but they had to spoil it by instantly making Pete a complete and utter arse. I'm not even kidding. Pretty much as soon as he reunites with Clark, Pete starts disrespecting and essentially calling Clark a coward and an idiot for keeping his powers a secret. After all, Pete isn't keeping his new gum-based stretching abilities a secret, and he's loving the attention he's getting as a result. Until it unsurprisingly backfires and puts him in danger, forcing Clark to bail him out yet again. In other words, instead of this cameo making you go, Pete's back? Wow, that's awesome! It makes you go, Pete's back? Wow, was he always such a prick? That's ultimately how this entire season goes. Everything is either just kind of forgettable and pointless, or it just feels all wrong. Oh, there are good episodes, good plot elements, and good moments here and there, but as a whole, it ends up feeling rather aimless. It honestly doesn't seem like they really knew what to do or where to go with anything this time around, as this really is an incredibly lackluster filler season. As I understand it, some of this could potentially be explained by the fact that this was made during the 2008 writer's strike, but that still doesn't make the end result any better. I can't even really pick a favorite or least favorite episode, as they're all pretty much on the same level. Not dreadful, but also very far from brilliant. The closest to a standout episode this season has to offer is probably the one titled Fracture, but that's mostly down to the somewhat interesting setting and direction, what with it taking place mostly inside Lex's head and all. Apart from that though, I can't really think of a single episode I would call better or worse than any of the others. They're all pretty much the same level of meh. Well, I suppose it does end on a pretty good note though, as the finale is kind of a banger. At least compared to the rest of the season. As mentioned, Clark does finally destroy Brainiac for good, but that doesn't really fix much outside of releasing Lana from his mind control. Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention this before, but Brainiac does indeed put Lana into an all but vegetative state in order to convince Kara to help him travel through time. From then on, Lana is placed in some sort of institution in order to keep her safe and under observation, and once Brainiac is destroyed, she does apparently recover. She doesn't actually stick around though, as she instead only leaves Clark a Dear John video and takes off. Yup, Lana is gone yet again, and this time she's definitely not coming back. Until the next season, because that whole routine isn't getting extremely annoying or anything. It also seems that Chloe might be in some serious trouble as she gets arrested after Jimmy refuses to keep feeding Lois false information on behalf of Lex. Yeah, it seems Jimmy made a bit of a deal with Lex in order to keep Chloe out of prison after that whole NSA hacking thing. As expected though, this help wasn't free as Lex wanted Jimmy to keep Lois off his back, but once Jimmy backs out, Lex calls in the feds. That's not all Lex is up to though, as he has managed to get his hands on the contents of that Veritas vault. Said content turns out to be a cryptograph that through a whole mess of junk I can't be bothered to get into, eventually leads Lex to actually find that artifact that supposedly will let him control Clark. What exactly is this artifact? Well, it's a giant 20-sided dice looking thing, so I guess this is all a massive D&D session and Lex is now the DM or some such. Actually, it's apparently some sort of map, or at least it contains one, as it shows Lex the exact location of Clark's fortress. He initially still fails to find the actual fortress though, as every plane and search party he sends near this location ends up disappearing, I think because of some defensive measures from the fortress. It doesn't take that long before Lex breaks through though, as he just needed Brainiac as Kara to tell him to bring that orb with him when going to the location it shows him. That's right, this genius never even considers actually bringing the thing telling him where to go to the place he needs to go before someone else points out that possibility. In any case, once Clark hears that Lex is headed to the Arctic, he puts 2 and 2 together and heads to the fortress too. But it seems he gets there just a little too late.
You'll never threaten the world again, Kal-El.